to Unconversations, a speaker series highlighting promoting unconventionally excellent global leaders who are taking bold, unconventional steps to stand out in their lives and companies. I'm Dr. Allison Schmidt, and today I'm excited to welcome Kim Alver to have an unscripted, unconventional conversation with me. Thank you, Kim, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Allison. I'm looking forward to this.
Let me introduce you. Kim Alver is the founder of Alver International LLC and the creator of the Mental Health Experience, a transformative program designed to help individuals gain control over their thoughts, emotions, and actions to give a more fulfilled life. Her work is recognized for her practical approach and profound impact. She's a licensed counselor, certified coach, award-winning and best-selling author, international speaker and educator, and a leader and entrepreneur in her own right. Dedicated to freeing people, self-created misery, Kim's passion is helping others to realize they hold the key to their mental freedom, which is also the title of her most recent book, which came out on July of this year.
Thank you so much, Allison. That was quite an introduction.
Thank you. I have just a little more.
No.
Yes, in 2011, she created the Academy of Choice, which I went through, a BCC program for coaches. And she offers the Mental Freedom Certification, which provides counselors and coaches extensive training, supervision, and guidance in this powerful methodology. When she's not traveling for work, Kim resides in Chicago. Kim, thank you again so much for joining us.
And thank you. It's my pleasure.
I was so excited about your words that began with un.
Okay. So my first one is unattached. And I like to talk about being unattached because so many people in my life think that I need a man in my life to be happy. And while I welcome anyone into my life, not just anyone, of course, but I would welcome a man into my life if it was the right person. But I am not in need of having a man in my life to be happy. So I'm unattached in that way. And therefore, I get to live my life, do what I want. I don't have to check with anyone. I don't have to consult with anybody, let anybody know where I'm coming or going. I just do that. And that's very freeing. I also say I am unbreakable. Mentally. I have been broken physically. As you know, I had a hot air balloon accident and broke both my legs once. So I am somewhat breakable, but I am unbreakable in the fact that I have very good resilience. I've worked on that over the years. I surely can be knocked down. I think life has a way of doing that with people, but it doesn't take me very long to get back up. And that's because I've worked on developing strength and resilience over the years. And I also think anyone can be unbreakable when they have the information and they're willing to practice before they actually need those skills. And then I say I'm unstoppable. And I'm unstoppable because I am an entrepreneur. I do run a business. I was in the recession of 2008. I was through COVID, and here I am still standing in 2004. So I have a passion and a mission for what I do, and I truly want to change the world and free everyone from their self-created misery. And I would say most of it is self-created. So I have a mission, and I won't stop until I at least have people to replace me to continue the mission, or I see significant progress in the mission. So those are my unwords: unattached, unbreakable, unstoppable.
When you were giving me a bit of background between some of the physical things that you encountered through a hot air balloon accident, what was that like for you to be able to, from a mental perspective, because it was a physical, I'm sure, rehabilitation. How did that work for you?
It worked great. In fact, the doctor said, when I looked him in the eye and I said point blank, I need to know how long I'm going to be in this wheelchair. And he told me, after I'd already been in the wheelchair for a couple of weeks, he said 4 months. And my heart sunk, because I'm a public speaker. And at that time, most of my, well, not most, but a lot of my speaking was being done with the military. And I knew they were never going to hire me to speak in a wheelchair. when we're sending, service members off into war, they're not going to have a speaker in a wheelchair speaking to the audience. So, and I was right about that. They didn't, but I knew I was not going to be in that wheelchair for 4 months. And I was able to stand. I asked how long before I can stand for 45 minutes, and he told me 4 months. And I stood for 3 hours after 2 months, and I was able to rehab, doing the things I was doing, home exercises, but then I could go to PT once I could stand. And the doctors said, we don't know how to explain this other than your attitude, because I had an attitude throughout the whole thing. One of the things I talk about in Mental Freedom is we need to focus on the things we can do, not on the things that we can't. I really focused on the things I could do. I focused on getting stronger in rehab. I focused on being a light in the lives of the older people that were in rehab. I was the kid on the block, because, this was a rehab in Arizona, in Sedona, of all places to be stuck for rehab. That's a great place. It was end of November. My kids just had 10 inches of snow for Thanksgiving, and I was in 80-degree weather. I could wheel myself out into the sunshine and watch the mountains. And it was not as much of a hardship as it could have been if I only was focusing on the frustration of the things that I couldn't do.
Wow. That is a very impactful story, and how to be able to look at your own situation and try to find the positive within that story to keep pressing on. So you have been in the coaching field for a very long time, and I have admired you and admired your work, and even more about your unconventional approach and just you yourself being unconventional. How would you describe, because in the coaching, and especially you have a lot of programs that have to follow very specific guidelines, and especially when folks like myself who went through your training program and was very fortunate to receive my BCC, how did you come up with your coaching process and all the different facets that you do? And I don't know if that sort of relates to kind of your story that you wanted to share with the audience, or if that would be a good starting point.
Well, everything relates to the story, right? I mean, everybody has a story. In this case, the answer to this question started in 1987 when I had a problem. I have a very, I would call it a strong independent streak. Some people might call it a strong stubborn streak. I get to define it for myself however I like, and I say independent and unstoppable, right?
Yes.
Well, I had a conflict with my boss, and I'd worked for him for 5 years, and I kept trying. 5 years I tried. I'm very loyal as an employee, so I wasn't really thinking leaving was a big option. But after 5 years, I realized this just wasn't going to work, and he was definitely not going anywhere. So I looked for a new job, and I applied to 3 different places, and the job I ended up choosing was at a foster care agency. And one of the reasons I chose that place was because they told me they trained all their employees in reality therapy. I didn't know what that was. I hadn't learned that in school. And I was happy to have more exposure to like an academic environment because I wanted my master's degree. At that point, I only had a bachelor's. And I had 2 small children. I wasn't ready to go back for my master's yet. So I thought this would keep my toes in that academic learning kind of mode. So I took my first training in reality therapy, and I had the most fabulous instructor. She was a woman who had twins who were 3 years older than my oldest son. And she was traveling the country teaching this stuff. And I remember sitting in her audience saying, I want to be you when I grow up. And I became a trainer in reality therapy while I worked for the foster care agency. They supported that all the way because I then trained their staff, and, that was part of my job. And I also was able to have a little part-time gig on the side doing some work for other organizations in the area. And I learned reality therapy was created by William Glasser. And I also learned his corresponding choice theory. And it just was part of my professional identity. But then in 1994, my husband was diagnosed with leukemia, and he was only 33 years old. And the doctor thought, oh, this is no big deal. You have great health insurance. He has 6 brothers and sisters. We'll find him a bone marrow match and he'll get a transplant and be fine. But that's not what was in the cards. He didn't have a good match. He did have a transplant, but it didn't work. So he passed away 5 years later. And it wasn't until my husband got sick that I really recognized that choice theory was something I could use in my own life. It wasn't just a professional identity or a tool for my choice theory or for my counseling toolbox. It was actually a way of living my life. And I started to put it to practice in my personal life. And that's when the growth started to happen. And I
Do you mind
believe,
me asking? I just want to pause there just for a minute, just for our listeners. Can you give sort of just a brief definition of choice therapy so people can really understand how this was so impactful and important for you?
well, it's a lot like the Serenity Prayer for those people who know the Serenity Prayer. So one of the first things is we have to recognize that human beings are motivated from the inside out. What's going on around us, outside of us, certainly provides us with information that we then respond to. But our responses are clearly based on what we want internally in that situation. So we don't get to choreograph what's going on in our life. We don't have much control over that. But we do have that control over how we respond.
Yes.
And we usually respond based on which of our 5 basic needs is most prominent in that moment. So we have 5 basic needs. I've named them a little differently than Glasser did, but they all mean the same thing. So I talk about safety and security, connection, significance, freedom, and joy. And whichever one is the most depleted is the one that usually rises to the top in whatever situation you're in. And then you find the behavior internally that would get you the most of what you want from that situation. And that's what you do. And so it's an internal motivation, and it's defined by the needs. And when you're working with someone, the idea is to try to help them accept the things that are happening in their life that they don't control because they're happening. So saying they're not happening or wishing they weren't is not going to change anything. And then developing the agency to take the steps they need to take to move them in the direction that they want to go, instead of staying trapped as a victim in whatever circumstances they find themselves.
That is a perfect. I'm sure the listeners can definitely relate to what you're talking about.
Yeah, so my story started with choice theory, and it pretty much continues with choice theory. So after my husband's death, I needed to use choice theory parenting in my life to parent those 2 strong-willed, testosterone-driven boys of mine who would, under most circumstances, run roughshod over me. But their father was always there to make sure that that didn't happen. And with him gone, they were testing the waters, and I made multitudes of mistakes. But I learned through that process about how to parent differently than my husband did and differently than I did before he died. And I'm very happy with the final product. Not that I didn't go through a lot of angst in between, but that was great, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I always say I have 2 sons. My son Dave is the oldest, and he's a connection guy. So he had an internal desire to please me, which really worked in my favor a lot of the times. Kyle, on the other hand, didn't have any of that. Kyle was the significance and the freedom kid. So I always say I had the blessing of having a Kyle in my life because I had Kyle as my consummate teacher of choice theory. Glasser may have invented it, but Kyle was my teacher for real because he was a person that there was no way I could control anything that he did. And he kept reminding me of that day after day. And I had to go inside and say, okay, if Kyle's going to keep doing this, what's my best response? Because I'm not going to get him to stop. So I look at that as a true, true gift, even though it was very frustrating at the time.
It was. But that's beautiful. That's beautiful that you can recognize that.
Yes. And then he further continued to educate me when the week before his 18th birthday, he told me he wanted to join the army and go fight in Iraq. And after spending almost 18 years protecting this child from himself, I was not very happy to think that he wanted to go into a place where people would be trying to kill him. So my first thought was, no, you're not. My second thought was, hell no. My third thought involved duct tape and a closet. But after that, I remembered, darn it, you're a choice theory parent. You need to support his pathway. And so while I shared my concerns and I made him watch Full Metal Jacket before he actually committed to going, and he still wanted to go. So I ended up actually signing the papers because he wasn't quite 18 for him to join the army. Now he finished school, of course. It was a year before he finished. He was just coming into his senior year. But he went to Iraq not once, but twice. Second time he volunteered. And I survived it. And I purposefully say I survived it. Kyle definitely survived it. He came home beat up a little, much older than when he left. And he has a different, I don't know how I would say it, but maybe perspective on life. And it's good. He matured. He came home with some things that weren't so good. Like the first year he was home, he came home in June and the 4th of July was tough for him with fireworks. He had to go inside. He couldn't listen to them outside, but now he's able to do that. So, there were things. He had some anger when he heard people complaining about silly things like their pool liner was scratched and they had to get a new pool liner or the heat was up to 90 degrees. He's like, oh my gosh, you don't know hot till you've been to the desert with full gear and a backpack. So he had some things to work through, but I got through that mainly using choice theory. And then I had a long-term 8-year relationship that I ended up ending, even though I was very much still in love with this person because I knew I had to love myself more than I did him. And that was one of the harder things in my life. But choice theory helped me through that. Then was my accident. And finally, of course, the tragedy that befell all of us in 2020 was the COVID experience.
Yes.
And I found that I was able to get through that quicker than most, back to center, if you will, because of choice theory. I lost all of my work that year. I should say most of my work. I still had some things that I could still get paid for, but very little. And it was during that time of contemplation that I was able to create Mental Freedom. And without that disruption in my schedule, I think I would still be on some treadmill doing all the multitude of things that I do without that strong focus on one thing, which is mental freedom. So that's the story. And mental freedom is completely based on those lessons that I learned during those stressful times in my life, because the things that I went through are things everybody goes through. Maybe not the hot air balloon accident, but people are familiar with losing some physical capabilities. It happens to all of us as we age. Some people lost limbs in war. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen. People's eyesight dims, our hearing diminishes. And how do we manage those things? And with mental freedom, if you start before you need them, it's a good prevention. It's like if you were going to be in a fight for your life tomorrow, you wouldn't start physically conditioning today. That would be foolish. You probably won't win that fight. And I think a lot of people, they go through life and life is treating them pretty okay and they can handle most things. Maybe they're a little stressed, but they figure, I got this, no problem. And they do. But then, as life often does, it deals you a blow that knocks you down. And if you haven't done the mental conditioning to develop your strength and resilience before you need it, when you're on the ground isn't the time to try to figure out how to be resilient. You need to be practicing it all along. So when you really need it, it's a habit. It's not something you have to learn in the beginning. So that's how I've started to think about mental freedom as preventative. Of course, it can help in the crisis, and it also helps after a crisis to kind of debrief and figure out what you need to do the next time. So it's not like it's only for prevention, but I think people who can anticipate that life is going to throw them a curveball, it's a good thing to practice ahead of time.
So, Kim, let me ask you this. So, when everything was going on with, obviously, with your accident, and then you supporting the best way you can for your son to go to Iraq, when did the shift for you go from? And I'm not saying that you left choice theory behind, but was it around COVID when you got the idea for mental freedom? Because I know we're going to talk about how mental freedom can not only be used. You and I talked about, there's personal, professional, and then there's life. And a majority of it is life because we
Yeah,
bring our life into our work, and we
right.
bring our work into our personal life. There's as much as we try to say we strive for work life balance, it's very hard to really achieve that. It, could you tell us how that, because I love the term mental freedom, uh, but how that transition sort of happened, and how you feel, um, how this can be used in all aspects of our life, because I think the key elements of mental freedom are very cool, and I think they're very usable, and I like to see how you can kind of share a bit about that for us.
Yes, it wasn't until 2020 when I actually stopped being director of William Glasser Institute US and was only the director at that point for international, and was sitting through COVID, that I thought to myself, and this was the impetus. I looked around me and I saw how everyone, at least the people that were immediately visible to me, were really struggling
Yes.
with this COVID thing. Um, Maybe the introverts were happy in the beginning, but even they started to struggle with this. And there was so much death. And in our country, depending on your views, maybe some unnecessary death.
Mm-hmm.
And so people were really losing their minds over things they couldn't control. And after 2 weeks of being completely out of my mind, I'm going to admit the first 2 weeks were crazy. I was staying with my mother, and I heard Joe Scarborough in the morning every day, because that's what she watches, the news show, all of the deaths on COVID. I saw the empty streets of New York
Mm-hmm.
City. I mean, it was
It was
just
shocking. It was
it
shocking.
it was shocking
Yes.
and worrisome,
Yes.
and I had this Pollyanna idea, "Oh, everybody's sheltering at home, this will be gone in 2 weeks," and I really believed that. But, of course, that's not the way it went, and so I stopped myself after 2 weeks. I said, "Kim, what's wrong with you? You know how to create the feelings that you want to be feeling. You think thoughts that will generate those feelings." So I started to work on things I was grateful for. And I was grateful for being in Florida in the month of March because I was visiting my mother. I was grateful to be with my mother to do some of the things that were considered risky at the time, like going into the grocery store. I did that. I left her in the car. I felt like there were so many benefits. I started a happy hour on Zoom on Friday nights for people that wanted to just join, and we played music and we danced and we talked and we had cocktails, and it was a nice little connection. I started to do the things that I had in my control, and of course my mood changed, my thoughts changed. And things became relatively easy after that. It was like, okay, I don't like what's happening, but I can certainly tolerate it and I will be okay and I'll get through this and I'm going to follow the recommendations and see where this goes.
Yes. Kim, can
And
I ask you a question? Because you mentioned something really interesting. I don't want you to lose your thought, but as you continue, you don't have to answer it now, but it may be brought in. I don't feel when there's something traumatic that happens, uh, the term mental health has a stigma to it, and people are beginning to for some reason begin to start getting used to that term being used, but it's been around for a very, very long time. And I think that the mental health aspect of COVID, I feel it still lingers on today. I don't think people really had or gave themselves the time or had the resources or companies providing the resources to really go through such an impactful uh, pandemic. And so that's why I was very interested in speaking to you about your mental freedom. So I'm not sure if you agree with that or if that kind of goes along with where you were sort of speaking, but I just wanted to touch on that.
well, I'm glad that you did. And probably I wouldn't have gotten there on my own. But that's another unconvention thing about myself. So when you think physical health, do you think physical health means you're ill?
And no, I do not.
Right. So
I do not.
when we say mental health, why does that mean that we're ill?
Correct.
It's just like physical health. It's on a continuum. I have great mental health. You have great mental health. Some people have challenges in the mental health realm. Other people are just kind of on a, maybe barely hanging on. Other people are doing okay, but a good stiff wind might give them some trouble. It's a continuum. So when I don't like using the word mental health to
Mhm.
equate someone has a mental illness.
I
Um,
agree. I agree.
so that's one thing about mental health, but I do think that there are lasting effects from COVID, and I don't think that they're really from COVID
Mhm.
necessarily because that's external. I
I would
think they're
agree. I would
because
agree.
of how we processed COVID and
Mhm.
how we thought about what was happening and the way that we hold on to. I mean, if there are people who lost loved ones during COVID and they couldn't be there because of the restrictions, they may still be carrying around guilt for not being with their loved one at the moment that they passed. And that guilt is going to eat them alive from the inside out. And if you were using in my mental freedom, the unconditional trust challenge, you might be able to let go of that guilt and forgive yourself and be able to release yourself from this self created misery that you have yourself in. And there's other things about COVID that are still holding on with people. And I believe it's really because they don't have the tools to be able to think differently about what happened to them and to be able to process that in a healthier way. So,
Let's continue. Thank you very much for. I love your perspective on that because I think you and I think very clearly, and I think we view people in the same way that people are not damaged. They just have areas that they just need to work on to get to a healthier place and to be for themselves and to be able to enjoy life and to be able to, when things knock you down, as you say, what tools do I have in my uh, toolbox and resources that I can get back up again. And again, that's why I love your mental freedom. Do you mind going through? I think you said there were 5 areas of mental freedom and what those are. And then yes, I did choose. You're absolutely right. The unconditional trust. And I was torn because I love the responsibility versus responsibility, and I love the unconditional trust part because that is so meaningful. Not only it's in life, but I think something that our listeners can relate not only in their place of employment, but also in general life, as you spoke about?
Sure. So there are actually six, but I don't like
Six.
to talk.
Thank you.
I don't like to talk about one of them in a
Okay.
short show because
Perfect.
I can give you just enough to get confused by it. But
I think that's why
I,
five.
yeah, right. I call learning mental freedom, opening your heart, freeing your mind, and transforming your life. And there's two sessions that correspond to each of those phrases. So the first one is free your heart. And this is about relationships with other people. And a lot of times those relationships are the things that give us the lack of mental freedom. So the first one is about the difference between responsibility and a phrase I think Stephen Covey coined called response ability,
Yep.
meaning the ability to respond. We
Yes.
always have response ability. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, are we responsible? Because I think that mental freedom diminishes when we don't take responsibility for things that are ours and when we overtake responsibility for things that belong to other people. So some of the things we're responsible for are getting our needs met, but uh, we often delegate that to other people and say things like, "Well, I need you to do this for me so I can be happy." So that's the other thing we're responsible
Totally.
for is our own happiness. And we're responsible for the solutions to our problems. A lot of times we frustrate ourselves when we identify a problem that we're having and we say it can only be fixed by someone else because you don't control that other person. So if you have a problem, fix it. Don't wait for other people to fix it. So um, the thing that we overtake responsibility for, there's several, but the two I mention in a short period of time are if we've experienced trauma at the hands of another person. A lot of times we will blame ourselves for our own trauma, even though we did nothing to deserve that. We'll talk about how we shouldn't have worn those clothes. We shouldn't have been in that part of town. We shouldn't have sat on daddy's lap when we were 2 years old. We think that we somehow created in another person the desire and the behavior to hurt us, which is never true. And the other thing that I find a lot of people taking responsibility for is their adult children and things that those adult children should be responsible for in their own right. And when we overtake that responsibility, we're actually communicating a very important message to our kids that they aren't capable of doing it on their own. And it feels like criticism, and it feels a little like keeping children instead of helping them mature into adulthood. I'm not saying you can't help your children. That's what responsibility is about. So that we want to, kind of suss that out. We do that in mental freedom. The unconditional trust challenge I'll save for the end because you want me to talk a little bit more about that. So I'll save that for the end. The third one, now we're switching to free your mind, because our minds are sometimes our own worst enemies. Have you noticed that other people would never say the things to you that you say about yourself in your own mind? So we are not our friends. And in the third session, we look at disempowering language and we turn it into empowering language. So there's some things we say that are just not true. And when we say them, we actually believe them. Things like, well, that was stupid, Kim. What'd you do that for, you dummy? Things like that when we talk to ourselves. But also there's phrases in our vocabulary like, I can't do that. And when I hear a client say that, my answer is usually, well, you could. You might not want to, but you could do that, just to open up the possibilities rather than to shut them down. Or in the interest of the growth mindset, you could say, I can't do that yet, opening the door for the possibility that you can learn how to do that. So that's disempowering to empowering language is the third session. The fourth session is taking a real close look at the stories we have in our head. And believe me, we all have stories. We have that narrator in our head that's narrating our day. And it is often a negative Nelly narrator. because our brains are hardwired for negativity. We have a negativity bias. That voice in our head is always kind of communicating to us that things are worst case scenario. So if you walk into a room where there's other people talking, and as soon as they see you, they stop talking, the voice in your head invariably says, they're talking trash about you.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
in this session, you learn to question that voice. How do you know that's true? And even asking yourself, what else could be true? They could be planning a surprise party for you. They could have been having a private conversation, and you entering the room made that conversation have to stop because you weren't a part of that. Or maybe you're the person that they were waiting for to start whatever activity they were gathered for. So you're there now. It's time to get down to business. It could be anything, but we tend to go to the negatives. So in the fourth session, you learn how to create different stories. You're making it up in your head anyway. So you might as well make up stories that help you feel better,
Yes.
right? You're never going to know why somebody else does what they do. If you have to make up something that helps you feel better. My true goal for this session is that you actually get to a point where you don't need a story. You just accept life as it comes, accepting everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, and know that whatever happens is happening for you and not against you. I had this mantra in 2021, nothing happens to me, everything happens for me. And it got me through some tough things. If you can stop railing against what's actually happening in your life and expend your energy responding to those things, it can be very helpful. And then
I absolutely agree. I've gone through 4 of your steps that you've already mentioned.
Oh, good. And then the fifth one I call signal versus solution. This is the one that I don't get into, but it's about our emotions. And I believe that our emotions were created for one thing, to draw our attention to things in our life that are happening that we don't like. Those are the painful emotions. Of course, the pleasurable emotions, the joy, the love, the happiness, that is to help us be mindful of the things in our life that feel really good. And we have so many of those, and we just keep passing over them because the negativity in our brains is saying, but what's not working? We got to fix that. So that's why we have emotions, but we don't always pay attention to those signals. So the emotion grows and it takes over sometimes. So that's what I believe happens when people go to psychiatrists for medication for depression and anxiety and anger management. I think that they've held on to those emotions for so long that now they've become a solution. And what I mean by that is we unconsciously use our emotions to get some things that we want, some very small things. It's not much, but it's better than not having it at all. So sometimes emotions can give us attention. We can get help from the people around us. We can control people with our emotions. There's all kinds of benefits to those negative emotions. So we talk about that deeply in session 5. And then the final one of my favorites, actually, it's the gift of mental freedom. And the gift is that you're going to have pain. I mean, I don't know people that get through life without it. So you're going to have pain, emotional, physical pain. And if you were to rank your pain on a scale of 0 to 100 with a number, so I tend to say my husband's death was about an 83 on my pain scale. It was bad. The work of John Demartini, he talks about the periodic table of elements. And in it, he says that every element in our natural world has equal positive and negative charge. It has the same number of protons as it does electrons. So he believes that all of our painful situations have equal positivity attached. We just don't notice it because we're too steeped in the pain. And that's what our brain is trained to pay attention to. So when you're able, and when you want to, I don't try to rush people through their grieving process because that's a personal thing. But when you're ready to start feeling good again, you need to recognize that there is positivity and do the work to find the number that you identified as the pain. And I also recognize that there will be some people who will never want to find the glow. And I call it the glow. The glow is the positivity. There'll be people who don't want to find it because they believe that if they start to feel better, it's somehow disloyal to the person that they're grieving for or the situation that they're grieving for. And they'll spend the rest of their life in pain. And if that's what they want to do, I'm not trying to talk them out of it. If they consciously make that choice, I'm good with that. But so many times we're making that choice unconsciously. So the glow stands for gifts, lessons, opportunities, and wisdom.
Oh, I
And
love
it's not a sit
that.
down and get it done. It's a process. You might think of one or two things in the beginning, but over time you'll collect more, but you don't have to wait for that eureka moment 10 or 20 years down the line when you say, "Oh, now I know why that happened to me," or, "Oh, I can see now that was the best thing that ever happened to me." You can know it in the moment that there's equal positivity, and take your time finding it. When we crashed in that hot air balloon accident, the first thought I had after the oh shit moment was, well, Kim, now you have the opportunity to practice what you preach. And what I was preaching at that time, I was on Facebook posting, "This happened to me today. It was positive. What's good about your day?" That was my question to everyone. And I kept asking that question throughout my rehab. And every day I found something to be very happy about. And so if I could do that in a hospital bed with two broken legs, it's something that anybody can do if they're motivated to do it. You have to want to do it and you have to want to feel better. So
And
mental
I
freedom.
think and I think too, Kim, to be able to find that inner strength to be able to do that and to be able to, you have the mind and the body's hurting and the mind was like, I went through this really impactful thing, how could she even find anything positive? But to be able to kind of do a paradigm shift on that and to be able to look at a situation and find the positive, I find that just in itself a very unconventional thought process that you've been able to get to that level.
Yeah, and I've been practicing it for quite a while.
Mhm.
I read John Demartini's book, The Breakthrough Experience, in well, it was I didn't read the book. The book came later, but I went to a workshop based on that. Somebody I knew was doing a workshop when my husband was sick. And so I thought to myself, how could I even ask the question, what could be good about my husband dying? It just felt wrong. But I thought, okay, I have two sons that are teenagers that I'm going to have to help through this process. So let me at least ask the question. And I did. And I found two things in that moment, just two things. It certainly didn't equal 83, but it tipped the scales a little bit less than they were. So the first thing was, we're going to get a chance to say goodbye and our relationship will be in good order. A lot of people don't get that. You might lose a loved one and the last thing you said in a fight was, "I hate you." Or I often think it would be equally difficult if the last thing you said was, "Could you stop at the store and bring me home some milk on your way home?" I mean, I would not want the last thing I said to a loved one to be so mundane. But then the other thing I thought was, my husband had a type of leukemia, CML, that uh, was linked to the chemical benzene, which you'll find in automobile engines. And my husband was a mechanic. So immediately when he heard that, he stopped working. He wasn't so sick that he couldn't work, but he stopped working at that time. And because he stopped working, my husband was a bit of a workaholic. He didn't spend a lot of time with us. There was always a car to be fixed. So when he stopped working, he spent more time with my kids and myself than he would have had he been healthy and lived to be 100. So that was a gift. He taught my kids how to hunt and fish and work on cars, and he was their soccer coach and their little league coach. He never played baseball or soccer in his life, but he was coaching, and he taught them wrestling, and he was very good. He was a very good wrestler. My boys still to this day are coaching wrestling, and their kids are wrestling. So my husband has left a legacy because of that gift of time that he had, that we all had. And then afterwards, I found so many other things. I would not be here being interviewed with you because I would still be living on a dirt road with my husband in Northeast Pennsylvania in the Poconos, working at the foster care agency, which was a good life. But because he passed away, my kids had plans for themselves. I left that area, moved to Chicago, started my business, became the director of William Glasser, wrote 5 books, traveled the world. I mean, all of these things, they're wonderful and amazing. And yet, just like most people, if I could click my heels together and have my husband back, I would choose to give all of this up and have my husband back. But I don't get that choice. So when life gives us lemons, we need to learn to make, in my opinion, lemon drop martinis. I like them much better than lemonade. So make some lemon drop martinis or lemonade if that's your beverage of choice. But we don't get to pick the lemons. Life gives us those things without our consent. And all we can do is accept that this was our lot and then decide how to make meaning from it. And I use the GLOW as an acronym to try to help people find that.
I love that, Kim. I loved going through your training with choice theory. You know, I come from a therapy background, and then I obviously do work in corporations with having a degree in organizational psychology. So the business and the people is just such a great combination. Could you explain the unconditional trust?
So unconditional trust is a really fun part of mental freedom. And when people hear it, they are shocked. And when they put it into practice, they find it helpful. So when we say, I trust you, what we're basically saying to the person is, I trust you to be the person I think you are in my head, which is an unrealistic expectation. So when somebody deviates from what we have in our head, and of course they will, because how do they know what's in our head? We don't communicate it. And they're not trying to match our pictures. They're trying to match the pictures they have in their head. So when we say, I don't trust you, what we're saying is, you're not the person I thought you were. But I believe that we can trust everyone. So I've created this
based upon my preconceived view of that person.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what you want to be true. So I think that we can trust every single person on the planet, whether we know them or not, to do one thing. So when I say I trust you, what I'm saying is, I trust you to be the person you've shown me you are until you consistently show me something better. And that's a little take on the Maya Angelou quote where she says, trust people when they show you who they are the first time. I leave room for people to change. I'm a counselor at heart, and I know people are capable of that. But I know they're not going to change because I want them to change. They're only going to change when they realize that that's what's best for them. So when you look at people and the things that they do that you don't like, especially when it violates your sense of what's fair or what you wanted to have happen, we tend to take it personally. And we say, you hurt me. You disappointed me. When I think it's not about you at all. So the unconditional trust means I trust that every person on the planet at any given moment is doing their best to get what they want. That doesn't mean they're a good person. It doesn't mean what they're doing is good or right or just, but it means that whatever it is that they want in that moment, they are engaging in the best behavior they have to get it.
I really love the unconditional trust because it's a very unique term to use, and it's a very unique perspective, especially from a corporate environment. And I just kind of wanted to sort of wrap up with this. There was someone on LinkedIn that posted about family, and that corporations saying that we are a family, and how that can be how that can definitely be misleading using that kind of word. So how should your team trust you, and how can you trust your team? And I really see very, very clearly how the different aspects of mental freedom can really benefit CEOs as well as VPs, director, anyone that is really needing that has direct reports. I think mental freedom could be such a useful tool in the corporate environment.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think it could be as well. We're working on creating a one-day workshop for corporations, for their people. It could be leaders, of course, but we can also do it for employees. So that should be ready early 2025. So I'm looking forward to that.
That is fantastic. And Kim, I just wanted, again, I appreciate your time today. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Anything you wanted to ask me? This has been such a delightful conversation with you.
Well, I just love what you're doing, Allison, with the unconvention. It resonated with me as soon as I heard you were rebranding to that, because I have been unconventional my whole life. And it's what attracted me to choice theory, because William Glasser is a psychiatrist who wrote the book, Warning, Psychiatry Can Be Hazardous to Your Mental Health. So he's been swimming upstream. I followed him for that same reason. And I just love what you're doing with these unconversations and the work that you do. And I'm glad that you resonate with mental freedom, because I do think it is unconvention. So thank you.
You're very welcome. It has a lot of unconventional aspects, because I feel that it is changing, or can begin to change, the conversations that we're having in companies, because they're very scripted. And when you're providing feedback to employees, there's also this very fine line of what HR wants you to say versus what the company culture wants you to say. And I do feel that there is a place, and part of the reason why I wanted to change my brand and mix it up a bit by calling the company Unconvention and having these unscripted unconversations, is because I think we do need to change and speak to people as they are humans, with all the complications that we are made up of, if you will.
Yep. And we have complications.
Well, Thank you, Kim. I really appreciate it. So, hey, this wraps up today's episode of Unconversations. A huge thank you to our guest, Kim Olver, for sharing such valuable insights and engaging in an unscripted and unconventional conversation with us. Join us for our next episode as we showcase and draw motivation from remarkable leaders worldwide who are reshaping the definitions of success and leadership. I'm Dr. Allison Schmidt, and thank you for listening to Unconversations. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. Until then, keep challenging the norm and striving for excellence in all you do. Thank you again, Kim.
Thank you so much, Allison.